Okay, off you go, Jo.
Okay, thank you very much, Denise, for that introduction. Yes, so this evening I'm going to be discussing shoes and sandals from Egypt. So as you've already heard, this research is part of the AHRC funded project Artifacts from Roman and Late Antique Egypt, led by Professor Ellen Swift at the University of Kent. And this was a collaborative project that sought to research the understudied Roman and Late Antique contents of the UCL Petrie Museum of Egyptian Archaeology in London. In particular, the excellently preserved artefacts made from organic materials that represent much of the material that has been lost from other regions. So this was a broad-ranging study which was led by the contents of the museum, and it focused on objects of personal adornment, textile making tools, objects associated with childhood, sound making artifacts and instruments, and of course footwear. And a preliminary overview of the surviving footwear in the Petrie Museum revealed a broad range of styles, construction techniques, materials, and sizes of shoe and sandal, and the majority of these had never been studied before in any great detail. So this evening's paper will demonstrate some of the problems faced when researching this kind of material, as well as its great research potential. So using comparative material from other UK collections, I'll discuss the use of red decoration specifically on Roman and late antique shoes from Egypt, the regionality of footwear styles and their cultural significance. So we'll start with a brief overview of the data. So it's based on a data set of 89 shoes. And this was initially compiled via a preliminary search of the Petrie Museum's online database. I've included the web link there. It's a great resource and it contains the full contents of the museum. So this was further supplemented with Roman and late antique footwear from both the British and Victoria and Albert museums. After this, the next step was to conduct a bit of further analysis on each artifact to either correct or confirm the dates that had been given by the museums. And this was done based on comparative material from securely dated studies. And this resulted in some artifacts being removed from the list as their dates were confirmed to be earlier in the dynastic periods of Egypt. So our basic statistics are that 69 shoes came from the Petrie Museum, 13 from the V&A and 7 from the British Museum. Out of these, 53 had their museum date either confirmed or corrected. This leaves 36 which retained their originally assigned museum date. And we also have 70 shoes from the data set that have got their find spot specified by the museum. And we have 36 of those that are just specified as Egypt. So we can see here that most of the shoes we're looking at come from Hawara in Egypt. And I mentioned in my introduction that working with this kind of material can present problems. So first of all, the shoes in the Petrie Museum, as well as those held in the British Museum and the V&A, are not from recent excavations. Generally, they come from sites that were dug at the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century. And the Petrie Museum in particular represents material that was largely excavated by the museum's namesake, William Flinders Petrie, in successive campaigns across Egypt over a number of years. And whilst the methods in these excavations were groundbreaking for the time, and they do display a level of method that was not seen in earlier antiquarian digs, their work often lacks significant contextual detail. In the case of Petrie, his interests lay predominantly in the pharaonic period of Egypt, with Roman finds holding little to no interest for him. Therefore, Roman and later material was often poorly recorded or ignored entirely within the publications of the digs. And this is a bias that we often see continuing in scholarly studies on Egypt, which generally focus on the earlier dynastic periods rather than the Roman, late antique or Islamic. Many of the Roman finds in the Petrie have never been researched, whereas the earlier dynastic material is, generally speaking, much better understood. So we can see immediately that there's a number of complications that arise when dealing with material from historic excavations that lack crucial contextual information. It therefore becomes all the more important to determine what information can be gleaned from these rare archaeological survivals. They certainly still have important value as examples of shoes and sandals from the Roman provinces. So we need to ask what we can discover from these artifacts. So we can start by looking at the physical forms of the footwear. So initially, my plan was to take measurements from the shoes and sandals to try to identify the age and the sex of the wearer based on the methodology employed by Roman shoe experts Carol Vandriel Murray and Elizabeth Green. So using their approach, shoes with insoles of specific dimensions corresponded to the feet of either adult men, women, children, or infants, as insoles closely matched the real foot size of the shoe owner. So here we're talking about the shoe length and the width of where the instep would be, the shoe waist. So the intention was that this would directly reconstruct some of the contextual details that might be missing for these artifacts. However, in reality, it became clear that taking such measurements was going to be difficult. So some shoes consisted only of a sole, making it unclear if it was the inside or outside of the original shoe. On the other hand, shoes that were intact, such as the examples I'm showing here, were often so fragile that it was almost impossible to try to measure the insole at all. Furthermore, the data set also included sandals, and it was often unclear for the sole of these sandals whether the wearer's foot would be positioned right up to the edge of the surface or whether there'd be space left around it, so it would be difficult to determine where you start and stop your measurements. Another problem was also presented by the materials of the footwear. So the shoes that were studied by Green and Vandriel Murray in their methodology were made from leather, and they came from waterlogged contexts in the northern provinces. Now, when leather products are placed in wet or waterlogged environments, they swell, and then when they eventually dry out, they shrink. These shoes were therefore subject to very different environmental forces to the Egyptian ones in our data set, which survived in very dry contexts. In addition, the Egyptian shoes are of diverse materials, so they're made of leather, plant fibre, sometimes a mixture of both, and even a wooden pair, which are made from cork. The original methodology did take potential leather shrinkage of up to 2 centimetres into account. However, to predict the shrinkage rate before, during, and after excavation and potential conservation for this Egyptian material is very difficult. There is also a difference of approximately 2 centimetres between the average female and male foot. This means that any errors in sizing would have had a significant impact on our interpretation. So it ultimately became clear that this was not a suitable approach for this unique material. So again, I returned to the shoes themselves to consider another type of analysis. And I chose instead to look at the decoration on shoes, of which there is a significant amount surviving. Happily, this was far more productive. So the main types of decoration identified on the shoes were recorded, and there were 59 shoes in total that were decorated using one or more techniques. We found that the use of red was the most popular type of decoration present. So we see an example of a red shoe in the top left of the screen. And this was followed by tooled or cut leather decoration, as we see in the sandal soles on the right. The least common type of decoration in the data set was decorative stitching. However, we do have one example here, bottom left, of a shoe that features decorative stitching from the British Museum. Other than the use of gilding and the browns of tanned leather, red is the only colour that has been used. This excludes one single example of maroon leather, which appears significantly different to the other red shoes we have, and that pair is bottom right. So overall, this demonstrates a significant preference for use of red on footwear from Roman Egypt. I therefore decided to focus on this more closely. So red elements of decoration include the use of dyed red plant material, to create a border or trim around the edge of the sandal's upper sole. And that's something we can see in the fragment in the top left. As well as creating patterns across the sole itself, which we can see in top right, red was also present on the strappings of sandals. Now, in a lot of this material, the straps on sandals often no longer exist, except for fragments preserved where they are attached to the sandal sole. We can see this here in the example at the bottom of the screen. So we can look at these stubs where the original straps would be attached, and we can just about make out that there's the remains of dyed red plant material. So therefore, while some shoes may appear now to be undecorated, they actually would have had red straps originally. And we also have several examples where the main body of the shoe is made from red dyed leather, as we can see here on the left. Red soles, especially on sandals, are also present. And on the right here, we have an example of red soles with very detailed gilt decoration on a pair of sandals that are made from leather and also plant fibre as the inside of the sole. Now, red as a decorative element in shoes is significant because it is an apotropaic colour. So it's a colour that provides protection to the wearer. So this symbolic use of red is traditional to dynastic Egypt, where red materials were used in amulets and in spells. We similarly find use of red in Judaic and Greco-Roman cultures, as well as in early Christianity. So red was considered to be protective, with the power to ward off the evil eye. And we have an example here from the late 4th century CE. The early Christian cleric John Chrysostom describes the use of red string or red cord amulets worn on the body as a popular cultural practice. So he says, "What shall we say about the amulets and the bells which are hung on the hand, and the scarlet woof," with the word woof here meaning thread, "and the other things full of extreme folly? The thread and the woof and the other amulets of that kind are entrusted with the child's safety." And we in fact have found examples within the Petrie Museum collection during the course of our project that appear to be examples of these red cord amulets. So we've got 2 here. And elsewhere, clothing researchers have also shown that red was used extensively on adult and children's clothes, so as red trims around the neck and the cuffs to protect the entrances of garments. Other clothing featuring red included socks. So here on the left, we've got a 2nd century burial shroud, and we can see the lady who's depicted is wearing a pair of red socks. And of course, we have the famous pair of red socks that are in the V&A Museum, and that's there on the right. So it's very likely that the use of red on shoes is part of this broader cultural tradition. As the body's main point of contact with the ground, the feet are a liminal zone. They're requiring protection from pollution and the attentions of evil spirits. Traditional medical thought was that the human body was at risk from external pollutants that could enter the body and upset its equilibrium. Additionally, in a practical sense, shoes represented protection as they kept feet safe from thorns, stones, insects, and more. And this is especially important in a period when even minor injuries could cause life-threatening illness. Thus, the presence of red on shoes corresponds to the use of this colour as an important means of protection. So in this sense, we find that decoration on shoes had an important practical as well as aesthetic function. So I'm now going to turn to shoes and what they can tell us of regionality. So the shoes from the Petrie Museum can also provide information on geographical diversity or homogeneity in footwear style across the Roman Empire. So the dataset shoes are made from one of 2 basic materials, leather or plant fibre. 55 shoes are made from leather, 29 shoes are made from various plant fibres, including papyrus, grass and palm, and 4 shoes have both plant fibre and leather used together in their construction. And there's also a single example of a pair of wooden shoes made from cork. The use of plant fibre in footwear appears common throughout Egypt. The optimal preservation conditions allow such shoes to survive where they would otherwise perish. Whilst cork, which we can see in the example on the top right, would be imported from the Mediterranean coast, other shoes use papyrus and palm fibre, which are distinctly Egyptian materials. So we can see in the bottom left of the images, we've got an example of the palm fibre being used in a sandal. They thus represent the use of distinctly localised products in footwear manufacture. Some examples made of twisted and coiled fibre within the data set, so the examples that we can see in the bottom right, the 3 shoes there, they appear quite basic and with little to no extant decoration, suggesting eminently practical examples of footwear. Sandals like these in local materials might by extension suggest the kinds of footwear now missing from elsewhere in the Roman Empire that no longer survive due to the wetter environmental conditions. Certainly, materials for baskets vary across the provinces, depending on the local plants. Therefore, it would make sense for this to be the case for footwear as well. Furthermore, if we look to footwear excavated from other parts of the Roman Empire, we find some surprising similarities. And I created a subset of data of 17 leather shoes from Roman London that are now kept in the Museum of London's collection. And they were gathered for comparison to the Egyptian material. And this comparison reveals the presence of distinctive styles in both data sets. So here on the right, we have a woven fibre sandal. It's in quite deteriorated condition, but it features a very distinctive wide toe. And this exaggerated sole shape is also found in the Museum of London in the example on the left of your screen. So we can see that both these sandals are right-footed, and the hole here mimics where the original strapping would have been. So the big toes would go here, leaving this very exaggerated shape to the right of the foot towards where the little toes would be, over here. So in fact, these sandal forms are known from several sites across the northwestern provinces. And Carol Vandrell Murray suggests that they were worn by fashionable men in the 220s and 230s CE. And the really exaggerated forms were likely worn by a few, what she describes as trendsetters. So looking at the lengths of these 2 shoes, the one from the Petrie Museum is 280 millimeters in length, and the Museum of London example is 250 millimeters in length. And this means that both these shoes would have been worn by adult males. Now, their distinct appearance suggests a particular lifestyle, which has been suggested by some to be associated with the Roman military, and they're also associated with the 3rd century CE. Now, despite this relatively short time frame for their popularity, this distinctive sandal style was clearly present in different geographic locations. And we can also find other examples of similar styles between the London and the Egyptian data set. So in these 2 examples, we find notches in the big toe area, which are visible in the Museum of London sandal on the left. So we're talking about here, and also in the museum, the Petrie Museum example here on the right. So this example is from Hawara in Egypt. Archaeologist Lindsay Allison-Jones describes a short-lived fashion in Roman Britain for placing a single notch in women's sandals to indicate the big toe. And it appears that such a fashion also existed in Roman Egypt too. This means footwear styles were not necessarily restricted to specific geographic locations, instead appearing at opposite ends of the empire. And this is a phenomenon that has also been noted by Vandrell Murray for hobnail patterns in shoe soles as well. So to conclude, we can see that there are issues that arise when working with material from historical collections and older excavations. However, it's clear that the shoes themselves, even without certain basic contextual details in some cases, can still provide important contributions to the research on Roman footwear. By focusing on the material nature of these surviving shoes, broader cultural behaviours can be understood. So this is something that is clear from the analysis of red decoration on shoes and sandals. And we can also learn through comparison with shoes from elsewhere in the empire about, for example, the nature of material culture from Egypt as a province. The material presented here from both Egypt and London raises questions about connectivity within the Roman Empire, the links between provinces, and the spread of fashions. Egypt in the Roman period is often set apart as a place of difference in terms of culture, so that it can be difficult to use it as representative of the empire as a whole. The evidence for shoes from the Petrie suggests that perhaps the differences are less stark than is often suggested. The material cultures show similarities as well as differences, but also negotiations, conscious or otherwise, surrounding the choices of style and design for footwear. It also allows the integration of Egyptian material in this understudied artifact group into the wider discussion of footwear of the Roman period within scholarly research, which usually focuses on the northwestern provinces. Across the country, museum collections have similar such artefacts as I've discussed here, kept in storerooms and under-researched, the legacy of the outdated collecting practices of the early 20th century. I hope I've shown that whilst using such material can have its complications, these artefacts still have significant value when approached with care. Thank you.